to the Senate substitute to House Bill 838.
Chairman Hitchens has moved that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 838. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 838 by Representative Hitchens, 161st law to the 122nd Jaspers, the 11th, and others, to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 24.5.510 and Article 8 of Chapter 2, Title 35, the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to privileged communications between law enforcement officers and peer counselors.
The chair recognizes the chair of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee, Chairman Hitchens, to carefully and thoroughly explain the Senate substitute to House Bill 838.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that you just got a copy of this, and I'll be very honest with you. I got a copy of it about 5 minutes ago, and it's a very, very detailed bill. If you look at the first part of it, up through Section 4, it's the original bill that passed this House before we went on break before crossover. And what it was a bill, some of you probably remember 3 or 4 years ago, I had a bill that was passed here called the Public Safety Officer Support Bill. And what it did was it provided services for personnel, law enforcement officers, firemen, EMT, 911 operators, who were involved in, number one, in traumatic incidents. Somebody was killed, they were in a shooting, they had to remove some dead child from a home that had been burnt, and we had a lot of people come forward with some first-person stories in our committee hearings, and we ended up getting that passed. And I think it's been very effective for the last couple of years. The organization now routinely goes out to these events when they occur, and if they aren't successful, I started it in the Department of Public Safety in 2005. And we had a guy there that was very fortunate that had a master's degree in clinical psychology and was a licensed clinical psychologist. So we put him in charge of that, and he's done a great job with it. I was notified this year that by Legislative Council that they thought there was some errors in this bill. And if you'll notice on page 1 and a little bit on page 2, in several places you see public safety officer support and officer is deleted. What they said was that if there was any controversy in the future, that perhaps firemen, EMTs, and 911 operators wouldn't be eligible for this service because it said officer, and that typically means a law enforcement officer. So I introduced the bill. I think it passed here with very few negative comments or votes. And then today I get this amendment, which begins in Section 5. And I'm going to read it verbatim since you just got it, but it says, a peace officer shall have the right to bring a civil suit against any person, group of persons, organization, or corporation, or the head of a organization or corporation for damages, either pecuniary or otherwise, suffered during the officer's performance of official duties, for abridgment of the officer's civil rights arising out of the officer's performance of official duties, or for filing a complaint against the officer which the person knew was false when it was filed. Now, I think all of you know I spent 43 years in public safety in a variety of different capacities, from the State Patrol to the Governor's Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and as Georgia's first Homeland Security Director. Prior to the mid-'80s, these types of complaints were he said, she said. We had somehow interview people, investigate the facts as we knew them, and make a subjective decision about who was right and who was wrong. In 1985, I was the post commander of the State Patrol office in Savannah. And they wanted to try out cameras and vehicles. And I volunteered to be one of the posts where we did it on an experimental basis. I had a trooper down there who probably made more drug arrests on I-95. You know, it was the main thoroughfare. It used to be that most of the drugs coming out of South America would come through Miami, and then they would be distributed up I-95 all the way to New York and Maine. He caught a load of drugs about every third night. And so we put the camera in his car because I wanted to see, number one, how he was doing it, to make sure that he wasn't violating anybody's rights or saying anything that he shouldn't say. And he didn't have it about 4 nights, and he shot a guy. And, you know, the attorney for the other fellow and the media were all on us about unjustifiable shooting. Well, there was a camera in the car, and nobody knew anything about him at that time. We pulled the video and watched it, and the commissioner came down at that time, and we watched it. And it was the passenger, it wasn't the driver, and it was loaded with dope. But what happened was the passenger fell out with his right leg, had a gun in his hand, and the trooper told him 21 times on tape to drop the gun. And when he didn't drop the gun, he started a forward movement, and the trooper shot him. Fortunately, the guy survived, but you know, I have no idea what would have happened with that case if we hadn't had a camera. Shortly thereafter, we put cameras in all our cars, and you know, it's been a very positive thing from 2 perspectives. Primarily that we actually see what transpires, but it protects the officer when he does the right thing, and it allows us to take action against him when he's done the wrong thing. And I've found several cases on both sides where we probably wouldn't have come to that decision had we not had the camera. I had a fellow that worked for me, and most of you in here know him, and I'm not going to mention any names. Al Williams. No, but he worked up in Blue Ridge, a place many of you have probably heard of through the years here. But he wrote a lady a citation, and when he went to court, the trooper outlined the case and asked the lady what she had to say. And she said basically she may have been speeding, she wasn't sure, but the trooper made some improper suggestions to her that she was offended by. And they had a lady judge, and she questioned the trooper and said, "What in the world were you doing?" He said, "I wasn't doing anything. And if you'll give me 45 minutes till I can go get an NCO to get the tape out of storage in our evidence locker, I'll bring it back and you can watch it." And that occurred. And when the judge watched it in her chambers and came back out, she sentenced the lady to 2 weeks in jail for lying about what happened, because none of that ever occurred. And I had another case, and I know I'm going on and on here, but that occurred in Emmanuel County, and a preacher that I knew very well called me and accused a trooper who had stopped his friend from speeding. He was following along in another car, but he said he got out and he listened to it, and the trooper was very obviously racist. And I knew him. I knew the trooper, and I didn't believe it to be the case. And so he said, "What are you going to do about it?" I said, "We're going to investigate it." He said, "What do you mean investigate? How are you going to do that?" I said, "The first thing we're going to do is pull a tape recording of what actually occurred." He said, "What do you mean, a tape recording?" I said, "All our cars are equipped with tapes, and whatever occurred there will be pretty obvious to us when we look at it." So I had him pull the tape, and nothing happened. The preacher and his acquaintance were very unhappy about getting a citation, but he hadn't done a thing. And I say that to say we had one more, and I could go on all day. My wife said
take your time now.
John Burns knows it, but my wife once said, "I can talk the longest and say the least of anybody she knows." But and as we go further into this, you'll see what I'm talking about. But we had another one down in Cordele where they arrested an individual for drunk driving. About 5 years previous, we had a similar incident down there where the guy had pulled a gun and shot and killed the chief of police down there, and one of our troopers, and injured the sheriff in the jail. And although he got the death penalty out of it, in the second case, after he was already arrested for DUI and they were escorting him to the jail cell, the guy sucker punched the trooper, broke his nose and jaw. And we were prohibited by rule from suing, and I just thought it was dastardly. Certainly he deserved to be sued, and luckily Workman's Comp paid for it, but I thought he ought to get some damages from something that should have never occurred. Now, Section 5 is a little more stringent. Section 6, I'm sorry. No, it's the end of Section 5. It's Section 6. I just got this. As usual, in this code section, it refers to first responder, which means any firefighter, municipal, county, or volunteer fire department, a peace officer is defined in code section, and an emergency medical technician. A person commits the offense of bias, motivated intimidation when such person maliciously and with a specific intent to intimidate, harass, or terrorize another person because of that person's actual or perceived employment as a first responder, causes death or serious bodily harm to another person, or causes damage to or destroys any real or personal property of a person because of actual or perceived employment as a first responder without permission, and the amount of the damage exceeds $500 or the value of the property destroyed exceeds $500. Any person that violates subsection B of this code shall be guilty of the offense of bias, motive, intimidation, and upon conviction thereof shall be punished by imprisonment of not less than 1 or more than 5, a fine of not more than $5,000 or both. So you can see it becomes a felony. But it's a serious thing, and it occurs all the time to law enforcement officers and much less infrequently to firemen. But I've had people come to my house on several occasions because I've had some dealings with them in the law enforcement capacity. And I'm pretty proud of my record. In 43 years, I had one complaint, and it occurred on the first day I was on the road by myself. And the complainant said he didn't like getting a ticket. So, I've dealt with thousands and thousands of people and a variety of different instances, and many very emotional. And I've always thought I was fairly good at verbal judo and being able to minimize what was going on. Now, some people you just can't do it with. But a lot of our law enforcement personnel across this state are subjected to a lot of what would be criminal activity if this passes, just because they do what they do. And I can go on. I had one up in Madison just before I retired, and they got into a chase and had a shootout, and the guy was shooting at them, and the Covington police asked for the troopers to come help, and the trooper ended up shooting and killing the guy. Well, his brother was in prison, and this guy had been in prison before. And the GBI told us that through the prison system, they'd got word that he'd put out a contract on the trooper. They live in the same little town about 2 miles apart, and they see each other at Walmart and around the shopping centers all the time. And every time he saw him, he made threatening gestures or remarks. And my understanding is if this passes, something like that can be dealt with. I don't know that you get 1 to 5, but certainly they ought to be circumvented from being able to threaten or intimidate based on their job. I'm looking here at the minority leader, and I know I was involved in a case over in Statesboro. I'm going to tell you a lot after we get done here today. But he'd represented a fellow who got 5 years in prison. And after the guy got out, he came to his office, pulled a pistol on him, and we spent 3 days negotiating before we got him released. And he really thought that he was going to take care of him, but you probably see his ads on TV all the time. If you live in the Savannah area, he's got an ad on about every 30 minutes now. And I say that to say these are routine issues. I know some people don't think that, and I've heard many people say it, that's part of their job. I really don't think it's part of their job to be subjected to that kind of treatment on a regular basis. But we're going to leave it up to you here today to decide whether it is or not. And I just ask for your favorable consideration. I think it's there are a lot of things going on in our society today, and I've often said here lately that the pillars that uphold our society have some serious cracks in them, and I worry about what's going to transpire in the coming years. And but I offer it up for you. I ask for your favorable consideration, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Do you yield for questions? Mr. Chairman,
Yes, I yield.
do you need a bottle of water?
No, I'm good to go.
All right. Chair recognizes the minority leader, Leader Trammell, to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Isn't it true that the law already provides specific penalty enhancements or crimes in the case when those crimes are against police officers and first responders?
I think they're very limited in certain cases.
Will the gentleman further yield?
Sure.
Isn't it true that the list of crimes already in statute include aggravated assault upon a public safety officer about discharge of a firearm, aggravated assault upon a public safety officer without discharge of a firearm and does not involve only the use of a person's body, aggravated assault upon a public safety officer only involving the use of a person's body, aggravated assault by strangulation of law enforcement, simple battery against a police officer, aggravated battery upon a public safety officer, obstructing of an officer, felony obstruction of an officer, felony obstruction of an officer by throwing human or animal bodily waste, removal or attempted removal of a weapon from a peace officer, user of laser devices against a law enforcement officer, and similar crimes against first responders and firemen. Isn't that true?
That's correct, but it's the specific charges already there, but it's much like another bill that we're going to look at here probably in the next day or two, that the charge is already in place, but they're trying to add some additional charges based on sex, race, culture, religion.
Do you further yield?
I do.
Chair recognizes Representative Walensky up in the gallery in the middle.
Thank you, Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Sure.
I'd first like to let you know that I am a civil attorney, so
I knew that.
new civil claims I would be very excited about, but I'm concerned about one thing on page 2. As I read lines 50 through 53, it reads, a peace officer shall have the right to bring a civil suit against any person, yada, 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 it listed more, suffered during the officer's performance of official duties. What does that mean?
Well, I would think that it would mean that there are many things said that are captured on tape that are very derogatory and pretty explicit from time to time, and I think if that occurs, I think right now they have the capability. The problem is many law enforcement agencies, and ours was one of them, has a policy manual, and it's that thick about additional rules and regulations that you have with regard to how you carry out your duties, and they prohibit this type of activity.
Does the gentleman yield? for one
Sure,
more question?
sure.
Just as I read again, right to bring a civil suit against any person suffered during the officer's performance. What is suffered? What is the claim there?
Well, I think it's defamatory in many cases. When I've been called a lot of names, other people have been called names, and it certainly wasn't in the performance of a law enforcement duty, but I had somebody say in an article here in Atlanta last week that I was a card-carrying member of a terrorist organization, and I took great offense at that. I've worked my whole life and was an intelligence officer in the military for many years working against terrorism, and I thought that was pretty defamatory.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative McLaurin to your left up in the gallery.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Speaking to this civil cause of action that we've been discussing, I'm concerned a little bit about what might be some vagueness in this language, which, over the last couple of years, I've been a little concerned about how easy it is to get some lawsuits in situations where we might not want them. So I guess my question is, first, what are an officer's civil rights? Is there a definition for that anywhere? Because could that mean any insult to an officer they could sue for?
I don't think it would mean any insult, but I think it goes to a certain degree. And to be very honest, you know this, I didn't write this. This was an amendment that came over from the Senate. I'm trying to defend my part of the bill that deals with a lot of other issues that I thought were very beneficial.
Gentleman, yield for one final question?
Sure.
Just regarding the other part of this civil action that I was trying to draw attention to, it says any person, group of persons, organization, or corporation, but I don't see any language regarding causality trying to connect those groups to the injury. And so I guess my concern is, if an employer gives a group of people a day off from work to go participate in a protest and somebody does something dumb, can you just file a lawsuit against every group that person's affiliated with?
I wouldn't think so, but you're the lawyer.
I guess it's an open question. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Stovall in room 341.
Does the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Is it not true that the legislators should have been included in this bill for the votes that we might take at the legislative during the General Assembly that may be offensive to others?
Just as I said a minute ago, I didn't write this bill. I'm dealing with what I was handed. I certainly understand your concern, but I don't have the ability to deal with that.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes
I think I've had enough, Mr. Speaker. Okay, one more.
One more?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm glad you said one more because Chair recognizes the majority leader of the House, Leader Burns, to your right for a question.
Gentleman yield.
I yield.
Mr. Chairman, it's always amazing to me when you, and I've heard it several times, and to be quite frank and honest about it, it's always amazing to me for your life experiences that you've been through and your career as a public servant in public safety in the situations that you have encountered. And is it not true, Mr. Chairman, that you've always treated everyone that you've encountered on the road or in this body, wherever the situation may be in leadership roles, with respect, and that's what you've demanded of the public safety officers that you've commanded over the years?
I like to think that. I had great hesitation when I was asked to run for this slot because I worked 20 years on the road in my hometown area, and I run into people every day who I gave citations to 50 years ago, and nobody likes it. Nobody likes to get a citation of any type. I mean, I've talked to psychologists. I've got a grandson that's a psychiatrist, and it's just inherent that you don't like to be accused of something, and when it's open for discussion, like many of the things law enforcement officers do, they tell me they weren't guilty, but I gave them a ticket anyway, and our philosophy has always been, if there's any doubt, let them go.
Gentleman, yield for another question.
Sure.
You've been thoroughly cross-examined from the legal perspective of about civil causes of action. But I would ask you, have you ever in your home on the property that you and your wife occupy, and that your children and your grandchildren call home, has your safety there ever been threatened because of your public service with
Well,
this house and from your public safety perspective?
I've been threatened both, and I think some of the people in leadership here know. I had some anonymous phone calls last year about my life with regard to a bill that was in our committee that didn't come out, and then several times during my career I had people come to my house, and some of them had firearms, and some of them were slightly intoxicated, and you know, it's not an unusual circumstance for law enforcement officers to have that occur, particularly if you work in the local area where you reside and they know who you are.
Would you yield for one more question?
Certainly.
Mr. Chairman, isn't it true, and I use this catchphrase sometimes at home, that my public safety, my first responders run to danger while I run away? I think that's a very true statement in every sense of the word. But Mr. Chairman, isn't it true that these people that work, put their lives on the line to protect us, protect our safety every day, that they deserve the protections and the appreciation this body can offer to them, but this legislation simply offers them the protections to help prevent them from being harassed and intimidated as they do the jobs that they signed up for, and many times at very low return for their investment in us, protecting we as individuals and our communities. Is that not true, Mr. Chairman?
I think that's well stated, and to be honest, during my tenure on the State Patrol, we had 15 people killed in the line of duty. I knew every one of them. There were probably 40 or 50 more who were shot or stabbed. One was, they tried to drown him in a ditch. If a soldier hadn't come by and knocked him off, probably would have killed him. It's a dangerous job. You never know when it's going to occur. And for the pay that they get, it just amazes me that, and I think we're about to see a real decline in people who want to be law enforcement officers. You know, all of us are very aware of social standing and what goes on in the communities and what people think of you, and certainly everybody enjoys a certain amount of ego that they like for their neighbors and their friends to be appreciative of what they do. And when that stops, I think we're going to have a real difficult time attracting qualified people. And I've said many times, and it not only occurs in law enforcement, you get what you pay for. And if you don't have high standards and pay people sufficiently, you get what's left.
Thank you for your service to this
Sure.
state and the people of it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to abandon the will, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate everybody who's sat here and listened to this. It's been a long endeavor for me, but I hope you'll see fit to vote for this bill, as I think it's very positive for our law enforcement community as well as the firemen and the others that many people don't think about many times. So, thank you.
Okay, we have some other members I think had parliamentary inquiries. Representative Jasmine Clark, did you wish to be recognized? What purpose do you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that qualified immunity precludes individuals or makes it more difficult for individuals to sue police officers, but that this bill would give the ability for police officers to sue those people?
Well, that gets into a long legal discussion. I would refer you to the leader of your caucus or to Chairman Fleming or Chairman Efstration, and I think they could probably share a lot of insight with you. What purpose does Representative, who's next? I can't see with the mask. Derek Jackson. Representative Jackson, what purpose do you rise? State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, is it not true, after 2 decades of serving in the military, that I support and defend all citizens, to include first responders, police, peace, and fire department?
I believe that to be true.
One more inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not further true that this bill, House Bill 838, is not solving the problems that we are experiencing today with regards to social injustice. Is that not further true?
I think that's something that will address itself to each and every member's judgment. Thank you for the inquiry. Representative Dreyer, what purpose do you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr.
State your inquiry.
Looking at lines 69 through 72 of this legislation, is it not true that if an 18-year-old happens to key a car of someone who is a first responder, the prosecutor can send them to prosecute and send them to jail for 5 years, and that the data shows us that prosecution is going to be harder on African American citizens of Georgia than on white people, and much more likely to get sent to jail for a long time?
Again, I think that's something that addresses itself to the judgment of each and every member. What purpose does Representative Walensky rise? He waves off. What purpose does Representative Abel Mabel Thomas rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it not true that in the current social unrest, and we are all in this together, where we are trying to find a balance between not just police brutality or police misconduct, but systemic and structural racism in America, that this bill has already been stated in terms, it's like a double qualified immunity, and it is very punitive, and it will actually cause more harm than good. Is that not true, Mr. Speaker?
I'm sure the lady believes that to be true.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does Representative Wilkerson rise?
Is it not true I speak as not an attorney, but as a father? A father who has seen his son interact with police officers every day, but had to have a 30-minute conversation with him because of the social unrest we're dealing with. A father that is going to see a chamber with not one African-American vote for this bill, and we are pitting law enforcement against our citizens. I don't know what to say. I love this chamber. I love this body, but I've never been so disappointed in my life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does Representative Reeves rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true that the vast majority of crimes that are accounted for in Title 16 and other titles in our code section require just general intent, but that this bill, with the inclusion in line 63 of the words maliciously and the term specific intent, has created a much higher burden for the state to prove intent, and that, from my experience, this higher burden will be the difference in some of the instances that have been brought up, such as generally keying a car, would separate those things from being what this bill is intended to cover with the words malicious and specific intent.
I'm sure the gentleman believes that to be true. That appears to be all of the parliamentary inquiries. We're going to be at ease for a few minutes before we vote this bill. So I'm going to ask you to stretch your legs, take a restroom break if you need to. Stay close by. We'll ring the bell. But before these individuals, I have an unrelated matter I need to see up at the rostrum. Chairman Alan Powell, Chairman Trey Kelly, Chairman Shaw Blackman, Chairman Sharon Cooper, Chairman Barry Fleming, and Chairman Bill Hitchens.